The memo that destroyed a career. When I first joined the firm, I thought I had finally made it. All those years of studying, the sleepless nights prepping for exams, and the crushing pressure of law school, all of it felt worth it when I stepped through the gleaming glass doors of one of the top downtown law firms in the city. Everything smelled like expensive leather and fresh ambition. You could feel the hunger in the air. Every associate looked like they were gunning for partner, and I was ready to prove myself, or at least I thought I was. They assigned me to work under a guy named Mark. 3 years into his legal career, he was technically still a junior, but just senior enough to have someone like me, fresh out of law school, reporting to him. The idea was that I'd learn the ropes from him, that he'd show me how to be a real litigator. Instead, what I got was an inside look at how the legal system rewards presentation over substance. Mark was the firm's golden boy, or at least that's how he styled himself. He dressed like a CEO. Every morning he walked in with a pair of hand-shined Oxfords that probably cost more than my rent. His suits were bespoke, sharp shoulders, perfect fit, always dark navy or charcoal, with some flashy lining he'd let show when he unbuttoned his jacket. He wore cologne that screamed luxury and always had some kind of gold on him. Tie clip, watch, cufflinks, even his pen. The man oozed confidence. If you didn't look too closely, you'd think he had it all figured out. But once you worked with him, the cracks showed. Fast. Mark had a problem. Several, actually. First, he didn't know the law, not just the usual green around the edges. Kind of ignorance. I mean, fundamental misunderstandings. He misquoted statutes. He cited case law that didn't support his arguments. Half the time, he relied on me to explain the actual legal framework behind whatever issue we were tackling. Second, his writing was abysmal. For a litigator, that's a death sentence. His memos read like high school essays, vague, repetitive, and full of empty jargon meant to sound impressive. He confused precedent with president once in a draft. I wish I was joking. And third, he was a coward, a litigator who hated court. I'll never forget the first time I went to assignment court with him. It's supposed to be the easiest thing in the world. No arguing, no jury, no drama. You just show up, set trial dates, and go. But when our turn came, I watched his hands tremble as he stood up. His voice cracked. His notes were a mess. He could barely get the words out. He was terrified. And this was the man I was supposed to learn from. But that wasn't the worst of it. Not by a long shot. Mark had a habit. One I didn't recognize until I was already neck deep. He stole credit. Quietly, efficiently, repeatedly. I'd spend hours, sometimes days, drafting legal opinions, building out arguments, double-checking case law, formatting citations. I'd email the drafts to him, assuming he'd review and pass them along to the partner. And every time, like clockwork, the same thing happened. My name disappeared. Worse, my docketed hours vanished. One by one, line by line, my entries for research, drafting, and revision would be erased from the system. In their place, Mark would submit identical time entries under his name. My work, my effort, his recognition. At first, I assumed it was a fluke, maybe a system error, maybe he forgot to include me, but it kept happening. And the more it did, the more I realized it wasn't a mistake. It was strategy. The partners began pulling me into meetings, not to praise my work, but to question my productivity. "You're falling short on billables," one said. "Other juniors are logging more." I tried to explain, but there was no evidence. My entries were gone. My name wasn't on anything. I looked like dead weight. So I took my concerns to the partner overseeing our team, a man with graying temples and the demeanor of someone permanently unimpressed. I laid it all out. I explained what I'd written, how it had vanished, how it reappeared under Mark's name. The partner barely looked up from his paperwork. "You'll just have to work harder," he said. Then he paused and added, without a hint of irony, "or smarter." Smarter. It echoed in my head for days. Smarter than what? Smarter than getting robbed blind? Smarter than asking for help? I went back to my cubicle, small, cold, and crammed between two walls like a punishment cell, and stared at my screen. I hadn't joined this firm to be invisible. I hadn't survived law school to be the ghostwriter for a man who couldn't even handle assignment court without shaking. Mark had been screwing me over for months, smiling to my face while stabbing me in the back. He thought I was just another disposable junior, someone who would burn out or quit before anyone noticed. But he didn't know me. He didn't know what I was capable of, and he was about to find out. Things didn't improve after I confronted the partner. If anything, they got worse. Mark seemed to know I'd tried to go over his head, and he doubled down. He became colder, sharper. Every interaction felt like a test. He started nitpicking everything I submitted. I'd hand in a well-researched memo, and he'd skim it with a frown and mutter, "This isn't what I asked for." I once asked him to clarify what was wrong, and he just waved me off. Figure it out. But I had figured it out. He didn't want me to fix anything. He wanted me to fail, because it made stealing from me easier. If he discredited my work to my face, then quietly removed it from the system and submitted it himself, no one would question it. After all, He had fixed my terrible draft. It was a simple game, nasty, effective. And I was losing. Every month, our firm had a strict billable quota for junior associates. If you didn't hit it, you got flagged. If you got flagged more than once, they started having conversations about your future. I'd been skating the edge ever since Mark started gutting my docket entries, and I could feel the noose tightening. There were whispers now. Some associates looked at me like I was already dead weight. Others avoided eye contact altogether. That was how it worked here. When someone started to sink, no one offered a hand. They just moved away to avoid the splash. I started staying later, coming in earlier, working weekends like it was nothing. But no matter how much I pushed, I couldn't keep up with the hours Mark kept erasing from under me. My name was barely attached to anything. If you looked at my official output, it was as if I didn't exist. I was exhausted, humiliated, and then came the final straw. Mark assigned me a memo, a legal opinion on a relatively minor issue in a case we were handling. It wasn't complicated, but it required some finesse. I took it seriously, like I always did. Spent the better part of 3 days drafting it. Double-checked every reference, used precise language, structured the argument cleanly, formatted it like a partner would expect. When I handed it to Mark, he didn't even read the first page. He scanned it for 2 seconds, scoffed, and said, "This opinion is shit." My jaw actually clenched. "What's wrong with what I wrote?" I asked, holding on to my composure by a thread. "Not what I asked for," he replied flatly, already turning away. But I still had the original assignment, the email he sent 2 weeks prior. I pulled it up. Word for word, I had answered exactly what he requested. I hadn't misunderstood anything. I had delivered exactly what he asked, and he was pretending otherwise. Why? Because he was going to delete the hours, claim the memo as his own, and probably tweak a few sentences so it looked like he'd fixed my errors. Then he'd slide it onto a partner's desk with his name on top and a smirk on his face. I sat there in my cubicle staring at my monitor, hands shaking. Not from fear, but from something colder, deeper. I wasn't angry. I was done. This wasn't just about office politics anymore. It wasn't about a difficult boss or unfair treatment. This was theft. Over and over. Open, intentional theft, and no one cared. The people who could stop it were complicit through apathy, and the man doing it strutted around like he was untouchable. But he wasn't. That night, I stayed late. Not to work on Mark's latest assignment, but to plan. I pulled out a notebook. Not for notes, not for legal research. This was for revenge. Cold, methodical, surgical revenge. I flipped back through my old files, digging up everything I knew about Mark. His habits, his tells, his patterns. I even pulled up old emails from the partner he reported to, a man notorious for avoiding email entirely. He was old school, preferred hard copies, and hated anything digital. I'd once watched him scoff at a PDF like it had personally insulted him, and that gave me an idea. Christmas was just around the corner. Most of the firm would be on holiday soon. The office would be half empty, quiet. Ideal for what I was about to do. I was going to give Mark a gift, one that he would never forget. The plan took shape almost immediately, not because I was some genius strategist, but because Mark had made it so easy. He operated on a predictable loop. Steal, deny, delete, and smile. That was his entire playbook. But like all creatures of habit, he had blind spots, and I knew just where to hit. The key was the partner he reported to. Let's call him Mr. Callahan. Callahan was ancient, at least by firm standards. Gray suit, white hair, coffee breath, no-nonsense attitude. But more importantly, he hated email. Detested it. He'd dictate memos to his assistant or scrawl notes in pencil. I'd once seen him physically tape a post-it to a monitor to make a point. That meant if a printed memo landed on someone's desk with his letterhead and wording, no one would question it, including Mark. And that's what I was counting on. So I got to work. First, I pulled up every memo I'd ever received that originated from Callahan's office. I studied the formatting, where the date went, how he addressed the recipient, what font his assistant used when typing for him. He liked serif fonts, bolded subject lines, and triple spacing between paragraphs. He always ended with, "Govern yourself accordingly." I recreated the format meticulously. Then came the wording. That had to be perfect. Callahan wrote in dry, clipped tones, like every word cost him money. I mimicked his style. No contractions, no emotion, just precision. The body of the memo contained a fabricated legal assignment, something that sounded urgent, obscure, and high-level, but was functionally meaningless. I made it about admiralty law, a topic so rare and arcane that almost no one at our firm had touched it in years. I layered it with constitutional jargon, just enough to make it sound important. Please prepare an analysis of the interplay between admiralty jurisdiction and federal legislative authority, with respect to post-Confederation, evolution in common law maritime claims, which is a fancy way of saying, here's a black hole, go jump in it. Finally, I signed it off with Callahan's name, just his initials and last name, the way he always did it. Then I printed the memo using the same type of paper from the office supply closet. the heavier stock Callahan liked. I aged it slightly. By folding and unfolding it, gave it a few natural creases, and slipped it into Mark's inbox late on the night of December 23rd. Timing mattered. I waited until Callahan had officially left for the holidays. He was old-fashioned that way, too. He took the same 2 weeks off every year, no exceptions. Once he was gone, there was no chance of Mark verifying the memo with him. He'd assume it was real, because Callahan only ever communicated with hard copies. A memo appearing on his desk like that? Totally normal. But the best part was this. I knew exactly how Mark would respond. I watched it play out the next morning like a scripted scene. Mark walked in late, as usual, coffee in hand, humming something smug under his breath. He spotted the memo in his inbox and froze. I saw his eyebrows raise. His fingers tapped the edge of the paper as he read. Then, just like I expected, he panicked. He marched straight to the cubicles and tossed the memo on my desk. "You've got a new assignment," he said. "Straight from Callahan. Big one." I picked it up and read it like it was the first time I'd seen it. I widened my eyes. "Admiralty law?" I said, doing my best impression of overwhelmed junior. "This is a huge assignment. I mean, I'm going away for the holidays. Can someone else handle it? Is this really urgent?" He shook his head, too caught up in his own panic to think. "Can't do that. It's urgent. Just let HR know. Maybe you'll get time and a half or something." Then he turned on his heel and walked away like he'd just delegated a crisis. He never questioned it. Never called Callahan's assistant. Never asked why this massive assignment had landed out of nowhere. Because Mark wanted to believe it was real. Because if it was real, then he could once again pass the burden on to me, steal the credit later, and look like a hero. And just like that, the trap was set. The beauty of the plan was that Mark never realized he wasn't in control. He thought he was playing his usual game. Dump the work on me, steal it later, and bask in the praise. What he didn't know was that this time, every move he made was exactly what I wanted him to do. By noon that day, he'd already taken the forged memo and retyped it. His version was nearly identical, except for one crucial detail. The sender had changed. Instead of "from GM Callahan," it now read, "from Mark Ellison." And instead of assigning the task to him, the assignment now originated from him. I watched it appear in the firm's internal tasking system, logged under his name, marked as urgent. Just like that, he'd made it official. That moment sealed his fate. Now, any time I spent on the memo would be fully traceable to him. Every hour I logged, every email I sent, every word I typed would be tied directly to his request. He couldn't back out later and say it wasn't his doing. Not without admitting to altering a partner's directive, which was a fireable offense. Of course, I didn't plan to spend 100 hours working over the holidays, because I'd already written the memo, or at least most of it. Back in law school, I'd taken an upper-year course that focused on obscure legal frameworks, including maritime and admiralty law. It had been brutal, dense, and mostly irrelevant to anything I thought I'd do in practice. But I'd written a final paper for it, and like every neurotic law student, I'd saved every version of that paper to a floppy disk that still sat in a drawer beside my bed. So while Mark thought he'd crushed my holiday plans, I was quietly booting up an old laptop to dig through archived drafts. It took me about an hour to find the file, another hour to clean it up and modernize the formatting. I added a few references, dressed up the conclusion, and inserted footnotes in the house style used by our firm. It wasn't just good, it was overkill. I made it long, dense, and impressive looking to the untrained eye. Mark wouldn't even try to read it. He wouldn't dare. After that, I had time to relax, see family, recharge. I stayed in town, couldn't afford to travel anyway, but I made it a point to stop by the office every couple of days. I'd sit at my desk, open a few case databases, and send an email or two referencing the assignment. Just enough activity to make it clear. I was hard at work. The rest of the time, I lived my life, ate real meals, slept more than 4 hours a night, watched terrible holiday TV, and every few days I'd log more time on the fake memo. 3 hours here, 5 hours there. I even wrote myself notes about case law conflicts and jurisdictional ambiguity in my private work journal, in case anyone ever asked for proof of how deep I had gone. By the time New Year's rolled around, I had clocked just over 100 billable hours on the assignment. Mark never asked how it was going. He assumed, as always, that I was breaking myself to make him look good, and I let him believe it. When the office reopened after the holidays, I printed the final memo that morning. It was thick, nearly 40 pages, and fresh off the printer, still warm. I handed it to Mark just as he walked in, gliding through the office in a pristine 3-piece suit with a new gold watch on his wrist. He took the memo, felt its weight, and smiled. Didn't even thank me. Just turned and walked away, thinking he'd just scored another win. He had no idea what he was holding. To everyone else in the firm, I had just finished a grueling research marathon. Over 100 hours of high-level legal analysis logged during what was supposed to be my holiday. I played the part well. Just tired enough, just quiet enough, just worn around the edges like someone who'd sacrificed rest for the greater good. The whispers started almost immediately. Did you hear about the junior who stayed in town over Christmas to finish a Callahan assignment? Apparently it was some monster of a research job. Constitutional law meets admiralty jurisdiction? You'd think a partner would give that to someone with more seniority. It didn't matter that none of it was true. The perception alone made me seem competent, reliable, willing to put in the hours even during the holidays. I knew how this firm worked. Reputation often outweighed results, and after being invisible for so long, I needed them to see me. Not Mark, me. But what I didn't expect was how quickly things escalated once the partners got involved. See, Mark had taken the completed memo and walked straight into a partner meeting scheduled for that day. Apparently, it was an informal post-holiday check-in, the kind where department heads went over ongoing files, prepped for the quarter ahead, and casually flexed on each other about their team's productivity. Mark must have thought he was about to impress them all. He presented the memo with confidence, maybe even a little swagger, called it a comprehensive jurisdictional deep dive, and probably used phrases like showing initiative and long-form analysis. He handed it directly to Callahan. That's when the trouble started. According to the gossip I heard later, Callahan didn't even look at the cover page. He flipped to the body, skimmed the first few paragraphs, and paused. Then he looked again. Then he held it up, pinched between two fingers like it smelled bad, and asked, "Who wrote this?" Mark proudly raised his hand. "You asked me for an analysis of maritime jurisdiction, and I assigned the research to—" "I asked you for this?" Callahan interrupted. "Now, here's where context matters." Callahan didn't just dislike surprises. He loathed them. He was the kind of partner who once tore apart a fourth-year associate for printing double-sided without permission. His control over his caseload, his team, even his memos, was absolute. So the idea that he'd assigned a junior lawyer to spend 100-plus hours on a deep-dive memo over the holidays without remembering it wasn't just improbable. It was offensive to him, and when he looked at the cover page again and saw Mark's name as the assigning lawyer, well, that's when he lost it. I was still in my cubicle when I heard the yell, a deep, furious voice echoing down the marble hallway, like thunder in a canyon. "Mark, get in here! Now!" Chairs squeaked, doors creaked, phones stopped ringing. It was like the entire floor held its breath. I heard hurried footsteps, polished shoes scrambling across hardwood, and the muffled sounds of stammered excuses, then a second voice. Louder, sharper. "What the hell is this?" And finally, because fate has a sense of humor, a third voice called out, "You! Get in here too!" That was for me. When Callahan summoned me into his office, the hallway felt like a tunnel. Associates peered out of doorways like school kids watching a classmate get dragged to the principal's office. I walked slowly, calmly, memo folder still in my hand, trying to keep my heart rate under control. Callahan was standing by his desk, holding the memo with two fingers like it was some kind of biohazard. Mark stood opposite him, pale, blinking, visibly sweating. His gold tie pin was crooked. For once, his bespoke suit didn't make him look powerful. It made him look ridiculous. Like a kid playing dress-up in court. "You wrote this?" Callahan barked. I took the memo from him, skimmed it for effect, then nodded. "Yes. I started over the holidays. The original assignment memo was left on Mark's desk just before Christmas. You wrote this entire thing, this monstrosity, during the break?" "I did," I said. "It seemed urgent. I was told you needed it for a jurisdictional briefing. I logged a little over 100 hours. I held out a printed docket summary, which I had conveniently prepared ahead of time." He snatched it, scanned it, and let out a deep, disbelieving exhale. "This is a prank," Callahan muttered. "It has to be." Mark tried to jump in. "Look, it's not that big a deal. I thought you— Not that big a— Mark," Callahan cut him off with the kind of tone that could sandpaper paint off walls. "This is one of the most irrelevant, obscure, and useless assignments I have ever seen assigned to a junior at this firm. This is borderline sabotage." Mark stammered. I thought it was relevant to that shipping arbitration we talked about last quarter." Callahan blinked. "What shipping arbitration? There wasn't one." "Of course there wasn't one." He turned back to me. "Show me the memo you received." I handed over the original forged document, the one I'd planted in Mark's inbox. Callahan took it, examined the formatting, read the language. I'd nailed the tone, the spacing, even the way his name was abbreviated. He frowned. Then something clicked in his expression. "I didn't write this," he said flatly, and looked at Mark. "And if you did, you forged my signature." Mark's eyes widened in panic. "No, I didn't. I just assumed. Look, it was on my desk. You retyped it. You resent it. You made it yours. I thought it was from you," he cried. Callahan turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "And? You didn't think to confirm? You thought I'd assign a junior associate 100 hours of solo constitutional maritime crossover research on Christmas Eve? You thought that made sense?" Mark had no answer. He just stood there, looking smaller by the second. Callahan dropped the memo onto his desk like it was toxic. Then he turned to me again. "You may go." I nodded, turned, and left the room with a steady walk. But inside, I was buzzing. It was done. The trap had closed. and the look on Mark's face would be burned into my memory forever. Later that day, the whispers returned. "Did you hear Callahan screamed at Mark? I heard he might get written up. Maybe even flagged for ethics review. Apparently, he wasted 100 hours of a junior's time on a garbage assignment." Partners furious. The official line that came out later was that Mark had misunderstood the memo and mishandled the task. But behind the scenes, everyone knew the truth, or at least enough of it, and none of them blamed me. I was just the diligent junior, working hard over the break, following instructions. As far as anyone could tell, I'd been played, and so had Mark. Only one of us knew it wasn't a coincidence. Mark didn't get fired. That would have been too clean, too satisfying. Big firms rarely fire people outright, at least not without cause they can justify in paperwork and performance reviews. But what happened to Mark over the next few weeks was worse than being fired. He was quarantined. Suddenly, he wasn't being invited to partner briefings anymore. Memos stopped flowing through his desk. He wasn't copied on high-priority client emails, and his name disappeared from case schedules. He'd walk by groups of associates who used to look up to him, and now they looked right past him. The partners stopped greeting him in the hallway. The golden boy? Tarnished. What's more, Callahan made one thing explicitly clear to me in a closed-door meeting the following Monday. From now on, he said, any legal research you perform for Mr. Ellison should be emailed directly to me, not him. That was the real punishment. Mark no longer had access to my work, or any juniors for that matter. If he wanted research, he had to do it himself or go through Callahan. Either way, his ability to coast off others was gone. And something even more surprising happened later that week. An envelope arrived on my desk, hand-delivered by HR. Inside was a thank you card. Yes, a literal thank you card. And a belated holiday bonus check. It wasn't massive, but it was something. A gesture. Enough to buy a few real meals and maybe even a weekend getaway, which I desperately needed. More importantly, it was proof. Proof that the firm had noticed my effort. Whether they knew the full truth or not. From then on, I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't suddenly skyrocket to partner track, but I had leverage, respect, protection. My docket entries were no longer deleted. My emails got responses. Other associates started asking for my input on tough assignments. I even got invited to drinks with the litigation team. A first, Mark, meanwhile, kept shrinking into himself. He was still there, still showing up in his tailored suits and gold accessories, but the shine was gone. No one took him seriously anymore. He became a cautionary tale. How not to treat the people below you. And me, I kept going. Quiet, steady, calculating. I never told anyone what really happened. Never bragged, never hinted. That memo remained my secret weapon. My little piece of justice. Years later, when I left the firm for better opportunities, I packed up my cubicle, slid that old floppy disk into a drawer, and smiled. Every time things got rough, whenever a boss tried to push me too far or a coworker tried to take credit for my grind, I'd think back to the case of the forged memo, the perfect con, the revenge that landed with surgical precision. He thought he could destroy my career. Instead, I wrote the memo that nearly destroyed his.
The case has been heard. The stories have been told. Now it's your turn to judge. Leave your verdict in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. The Court of Stories is always in session.